As every writer should know by now, it is deeply sinful to not be subscribed to this channel. Go on, try it, and see how you'll be invited to the Empyrean. If it didn't work, maybe try with a second account. Or a third. Hello, and welcome back to H8 Book Reviews. The first book I read of 2025 was this little thing here. Sin and Syntax, How to Craft Wickedly Effective Prose. And, what a decision that was. I don't really remember where I got it, most likely picked up at a fundraising book sale I used to help run. Whatever the case, I started reading it, and needless to say, I have some thoughts. Before we can do that, we have to talk about the author. And of course, before we can do that, I have to ask you if you would like the video and perchance subscribe to the channel. I get a hit of dopamine every time I see those little numbers go up. It's always appreciated. So, on to the video. Constance Hale wrote this book in 1999. This means a lot of the references contained therein are, well, dated to be certain, but not so dated that I, living in the ripe year of 2025, can't appreciate them. Granted, I wasn't even born when this thing came out, so maybe I don't understand all of the jokes present throughout. Hale is the author of 6 books, 5 excluding our present topic, and has edited more than 36 other books. Her other books are Wired Style, Vex, Hex, Smash, Smooch, Lesson Plans for Teachers, Writing Character, The Natives Are Restless, and I'm probably pronouncing this wrong, Iwalani's Tree. The topics of her work vary greatly with emphasis on politics and writing itself. In line with that, she has written articles and essays of an even more multifarious subject list, again with much talk of politics, writing itself, and Hawaii, where she grew up. It was living in Hawaii and learning to speak Hawaiian Creole alongside English that developed her fascination for the English language, and hence why I have her book in my hands now. If Hale or her other works interest you, the link to her website is available in the description below, as well as links to where to buy Sin and Syntax if you find yourself interested in that. So, let's see if you are. This book had a brilliant premise. Of course, literary advice is a very well-saturated space. Books on how to write well or how to write better are everywhere. To stand out in such an environment, you have to structure your content and your advice so that it either presents uniquely or has unique symbolism attached to it, thereby making it easier to understand and more impactful to the reader. They nailed it here. The title alone is sufficient to pique my interest, and I would wager the same is true of others. Sin and Syntax. It's beautiful. The subtitle may be less potent than the title itself, but it continues with the same theme. How to craft wickedly effective prose. A nice addition to Sin. This imagery not only conveys the running symbolism throughout the book, but also what the book is about overall. Even without the subtitle, we can understand very easily that this book will attempt to teach the reader about proper syntax, and especially improper syntax. This setup continues. For each chapter, of which there are 16 and spread across 3 distinct parts, words, sentences, and music, there are further subdivisions including bones, flesh, cardinal sins, and carnal pleasures. I love this. It's a novel way to make the different aspects of each topic stick out in the head of the reader. Such a feature is especially useful given the length of the book. It's not very long. The main chapters, including a 1-page epilogue, go out to page 256. Including 3 appendices and an index, we reach 285. And if we include the beginning sections like the introduction, we can tack on another 8. That may sound moderately lengthy, but all in all, it's not. This book has some frankly odd proportions. It's tall and it's narrow. It's not something you see frequently. And inside the book, the text is packed loosely. On any given page, there's simply not as many words as you'd expect. Not to mention the extra formatting, which further decreases the amount of space, like the curly brackets around certain blocks of text, and the starting page of each chapter, which is also really cool, and I will always appreciate books which utilize more visual aspects within them. Not necessarily pictures, but neat formatting and the like. Because the book only has a few hours of content, even when reading cover to cover, and it's a pretty nice cover too, It is decidedly not a slow burn. Which, to be fair, makes sense. It's nonfiction. Why would it be a slow burn? One aspect of that is that whether each part is good or bad will be immediately obvious, and you won't reach the end and suddenly have a new appreciation for everything that came before. And it starts off good. In the foreword, we get a line that feels like the philosophy for the book going forward. Words sleep around, and the tongues of the world are enhanced in the process. What better notion to focus on for a book specifically about syntax? Problems quickly arise. There are some things to enjoy, some good pieces of advice here and there, such as if you can't be bothered to pick up a thesaurus, you're a hack. What isn't enjoyable builds up much quicker. I'm sure that the author understands all literary advice amounts to nothing more than plain advice and not rules. No standard in writing can ever be absolute. I will not assume they wrote this book in an effort to iron out cold, hard, and fast truths about communication and prose. The sin they do commit, however, can lead one to that assumption. They fail to acknowledge their held position as being that of an advisor rather than an officer. This leaves not quite a sour taste, but the uneasy awareness that a taste is off without knowing how or why. Sure, such a distinction between advisor and officer should be immediately obvious to anyone with writing experience. It is not, however, obvious to the newly initiated, an audience the book points out as being useful for. This distinction should have been made, but as it stands, there is nothing textual to suggest that the rules laid out are not absolute, rubbing the wrong way those who often employ tactics to the contrary of what they want. This bleeds into other parts of the book, other pieces of advice. All too often the wording they use is absolute, such as on page 28 with the yellow mark, euphemism conceals reality rather than revealing it, which is, after all, what a writer should be doing. And I understand what they are going for here, the message they are attempting to convey, that the purpose of writing is to eke out a truth about reality. That even in the most metaphor-heavy poems and prose and the most complicated of analogies, we are not necessarily speaking facts, but showing truth. An important distinction, and an even more important job. I do not like this sentence. Like before, they write as though they are the officer here. More troubling is the compaction of the role of writing. They explicitly say what writing should be, what writers should do. Really, the only correct answer is that a writer should write. And even that is up for heavy debate. If I had to wager, at least some of the underlying rationale is that all people ought to strive for truth and to find a way to convey to others. And although I wholly agree with that sentiment, that truth is an innately moral good, that is nevertheless an imposition of personal beliefs onto writing. Not all obfuscation is evil. And this is all very ironic. At multiple points throughout the book, from forward to end, the rigid grammarian is shunned. Standard or plain English is not the end-all be-all of grammar and syntax. This is a great thing to tell people, especially aspiring writers or otherwise novice writers. Too many people, they rightfully point out, have been burned by the classroom assignment with too strict rules which fail to embody how we use language. Only they do the exact same thing here in this book. While reading it, this is something I wrote down. Yet here they do the same thing. For some reason, this is a hill they want to die on, and what a shoddy hill. Decrying the conjunction of the plural pronoun they with a singular antecedent. This has been a feature of the English language forever, just as they rightfully point out that some pronouns can somehow be also used as adjectives, because sometimes words can carry out multiple grammatical functions depending on the context, so too can they refer to a singular noun of unknown or uncategorizable gender. The English language, being a generally gender-neutral language, requires a gender-neutral pronoun. Bad advice, much worse rule setting. Another weird hill to die on was the complaint that the word literally was used figuratively, which is another quirk of English that has been established for longer than anyone who speaks it has even been alive. Why be such sticklers over things that don't matter? It's so weird, that air of contradiction. Here are two other quotes. So go ahead, be ungrammatical if it feels right, and clarity trumps grammar. Yet both of those quotes were directly paired with extremely specific rules you're allowed to break, but not any others. The last weird little hill called me out specifically. Page 120. Stay away from moreover, nevertheless, and thus. I mean, nobody talks like that. I'm so sad. The oddities don't end there. I feel as though a lot of the way it presents its advice and information does an overall bad job at communicating it properly. Bad habit of making note of something, acknowledging a potential lack of familiarity among the reader, and then only proceeding to give an example with nothing else by way of making it familiar. In a point on purple prose, but what exactly is purple prose? The answer the book provides is 2 examples of purposefully unnecessarily long sentences. They do not provide a framework to analyze these sentences to figure out how they are purple prose, nor do they attempt to answer that themselves. It is said and done, wiped away. Or there is much talk that something is bad without doing the necessary groundwork to demonstrate why or how it is bad. A good example is sentence fragments. Yes, it should be obvious that sentence fragments are generally poor, but they, like every other potential grammatical error, has its place in writing. They acknowledge it has a place somewhere, so good on them. Yet when they talk about where it does not have a place, they merely said it does not. There was no deeper analysis as to why sentence fragments used in that particular way they pointed out doesn't work. Show, don't tell, as the old adage goes. And it's weirdly negative. Much more time is spent on discussing the negative, the sins and the errors people make in syntax. The pleasures, the heights we can reach when we use syntax correctly and powerfully have much less time to shine. I understand that sometimes there really is just more to talk about for the bad side over the good. I may be guilty of that here. But I offer myself a leeway I cannot afford to the book. It is my job here to review. It is the book's job to help and to teach. I believe it not unfair that such a work should be better about expressing the magnificence of beautiful prose and of properly constructed sentences. In a particularly egregious example, we have the chapter on adjectives. The sins cover 6 and some pages. The pleasures can barely be said to cover 1. Perhaps worst of all, it's just not very interesting. A lot of things contribute to this. The negativity plays a role, the weird contradictions bring the reader, or at least myself, out of it, and so I care a little less, the general failure to properly explain things, and the like. But the largest factor was just that the prose wasn't interesting. For a book all about how to write well and how to use words correctly and craft wickedly effective prose, you'd think the internal writing would be better. It's not bad by any means, it just doesn't stand out. The sentences don't pop, the wording isn't anything to write home about. There's plenty of jokes, which, by the way, can be quite risque. Actually, a lot of content in this book is not exactly for the meek, so don't read this to a little kid or anything. Those jokes are usually alright, fitting neatly alongside the alrightness of the text. The best one came from page 52 when talking about the difference between whose and whose, as in who is. At the end of chastising people for getting it wrong, a lone paragraph reads, "Learn this or die." That's funny. I genuinely laughed. I didn't laugh at much else. And the best line in the book, a quote I really appreciate, was really good. It's not that I don't care about the future, but the tangle of many pasts and the gravity and beauty of the undeniable present tend to focus my attention at this desk. But that quote doesn't belong to this book. It belongs to Sarah Miles, in an email this book used as an example. I don't want to paint too negative of a picture, though. There are some parts of it I really appreciate. Unlike most books of its kind, it's willing and does respect and even exalt quirks of language like interjections and slang. God, I love interjections, and I love when people are able to use slang in writing. It breathes life into text and character alike, and I was very happy to see this recognized here. Not to say a lot of other books degrade slang, but they certainly don't acknowledge it. It deserves more recognition. Who are we to deny the important linguistic history of slang? How many words, fully recognized as valid and acceptable words by so many dictionaries and professionals, start off as slang? And, yeah, that's about all. Let's get to the final thoughts. Unfortunately, the book was largely disappointing. It had good intentions and some good ideas, but was ultimately bogged down by a few pervasive issues that you can't fully get around. I just couldn't enjoy the book very much, and in truth, I would not recommend this to anyone looking for writing advice. Not that it's especially bad, but there's much better books with much better advice available. I'll give it a 3.6 out of 10. I would much prefer to recommend you read a different grammatical advice book, one written by Stanley Fish called How to Write a Sentence and How to Read One. Really wish I had it on hand. I also have to do a review on that one in the future. Well, whatever the case, if you're inclined to disregard my recommendation, which is something you're more than welcome to do, remember that the links to get Sin and Syntax from both Amazon and Barnes & Noble are available in the description below, and on Hale's website it lists other places it's available too. Although for Barnes & Noble they didn't have the same copy I do, that seems to be a continual thorn in my side. Regardless of what you decide to do with this book, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to like the video and subscribe. Like I said, I get hit a dopamine every time. And that'll help make sure you're here next week. What will I be talking about then? Your guess is as good as mine. But until then, this has been H8 Book Reviews. Keep on reading.